Is that the Stig's Stroud-based cousin? All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
That is not dead, which can eternal lie. And with crowdfunding, even death may die.
No magazines? Ask your newsagent.
And Outrunning The Stig.
All this and more coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 5th of July, 2025.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Twirlers. Welcome to a very packed show today. We expect this to run a little bit long. Apologies to poor old producer Duncan. Have you had a busy week, Chris? I know you've been doing something interesting. So you've been stepping into something that Jason would normally do.
That's right. Yes, we did. My son and I, my son Luke, we did try and get through Sphinx Adventure during a 5-hour live stream, of which I think 45 minutes was us trying to load the game. That was not planned because I know I have loaded it from the cassette before. It let us down, so then we had to go to using a browser-based sound file plugged straight into the Electron from the PC. And it was still being finicky. And then after our first death, we couldn't figure out how you restart the game. And so we rebooted the Electron and had to go through the load process again. But it was great fun. And I haven't got time to talk about it much here, certainly not 5 hours worth. But what I loved about it was I was expecting Luke to sort of indulge me a little bit and then get bored. He's like 25, 26. And it just sucked him in. And he was in the zone and he had his grid paper out and trying to map. And if you've ever tried to map a game like Sphinx Adventure, it doesn't necessarily map logically. So he was doing his best to make things. And we spent most of our time wandering around in the iron halls, which is how far we got, you know. We didn't complete it. And he's keen for a part 2, which I didn't anticipate that at all. So stay tuned. Yeah, it was good fun.
Brilliant outcome. Jason, have you had a busy week?
I have, and some of it has been spent going through my archives where I found a 30-year-old newspaper clipping that is relevant to some of today's action, as well as this. It's stainless steel, so it's going to be a little tricky to pick up on camera, but this is a rare piece of post-Commodore lore, a mug from Merlancia Industries. If you don't know why I'm mentioning it today, look it up.
I have got back to soldering. I haven't touched it for a couple of years. Didn't realize how long I'd been behind on it. I've caught up by soldering up some greasy weasels for a project, as well as to help someone out with something. Other than that, I've had a busy week, and we're going to have a busy day today in the show. Let's get right into it. It is no secret that I love role-playing games. And one of the most common things in role-playing games, in fact now in loads of games of many types, is that historic artifact has been split up and you need to combine all the pieces in order to bring peace to the lands and restore the artifact. In Lord of the Rings, it was the shards of Narsil, used by Elendil and then Isildur, and then finally Aragorn, the sword that was used to cut the One Ring from the hand of Sauron. The sword pieces were combined and reforged, and that was an important part of Aragorn's story in the novel. But in games, it's just in so many of them. Several of the Ultimas have it. Even in Dragon's Breath on my ST, you had to find pieces of a talisman. Modern RPGs still do it. It is just everywhere. And it's here in real life too. Thanks to a story submitted by 42 Nobody 42. In 1994, Commodore International had its bankruptcy and liquidation. It was the end of this once great company that had brought so much joy to people with the Commodore 64 and several other machines. And just like RPG games, the pieces were scattered throughout the lands. Commodore UK and Commodore BV survived for a short time afterwards, but it wasn't long before the brands were separated and Gateway 2000 ended up with Amiga in 1997 and Tulip ended up with Commodore. And I'm even hesitant to say those things in case they're not quite right, because it's so difficult to work out the circuitous routes that the various different IPs and so on have followed. So I won't try and list what went everywhere. But the end result is that the Amiga side is fractured, with Hyperion and Cloanto being the two bigger players, but there are others. And the Commodore ROMs were owned by someone else and now are owned by Cloanto. But the actual Commodore brand, do you know, I can't even tell you who owns that for sure. There are no less than 4 separate companies who all claim to, and there may even be more than that. One person, that I can tell you does not own Commodore at the moment is Christian Simpson, known as Perifractic from his YouTube channel Retro Recipes. But due to some rather unexpected and unlikely events, he is now calling himself the acting CEO of Commodore. And it seems that that's quite legitimate from what he says. He's put forward 2 parts of a video series on YouTube. The videos are extremely popular, loads of attention. And the first was, can we save the Commodore brand? And the second is, wait, who is the new CEO of Commodore? There's massive amounts of comments and goodwill on the videos from viewers. The videos themselves are quite intentionally emotional. There's lots of AI video segments in it, and there's clever kind of video tricks to keep your eyes busy. And early in part 1, there's a guy literally crying on the video. It's quite emotive. And the actual details are quite thin on the ground. Mostly the videos are a bit of an emotional trip. And that's fine. I guess that's to be expected, because he wants to get you on board with the idea, and it is all about nostalgia. The idea, though, is that he fronts an organisation of which several Commodore luminaries are already signed up to, and with what he calls angel investors, buys Commodore Corporation BV from the current owners. And he has an agreement to buy, he says, and they tell him that it's okay for him to act as acting CEO and call himself that for now. So, Jason, I wanted to ask you about some of the things you've looked into. Jason, you have some knowledge of Commodore, I believe.
I have some knowledge of Commodore, and I have some amount of experience covering questions like who owns Commodore, beginning with that bankruptcy in 1994, continuing for several years after that. I can't believe we're doing this again, but here we go. Hi, everybody. I would like to make it clear at the top of my little segment here that none of us here at This Week in Retro are practicing investment advisors, and that we are doing our best to interpret the situation based on what has been publicly disclosed by a single source, that is, this perifractic fellow. Nothing we are saying is an endorsement to take a financial position for or against the proposition of anything being discussed. I would like to note, and I have a little bit of a different take on what Dave was saying about this acting CEO business. I would like to say I think it is difficult to verify Simpson's claim to be the acting CEO of Commodore Corporation, as if you go to their website, he is not listed as a corporate officer anywhere. That said, nobody's listed on that website as a contact. There is very little on it at all. There's a physical address in the Netherlands. There's a contact form. There are some login protected links to databases regarding their intellectual property. So doesn't prove anything one way or another, but it's not a detail-laden site, Old Commodore Corporation. Now, one of the first little factoids I latched onto early in this part 2 video, which is mostly the one we're talking about, is this line, I'm quoting, "I've set up the holding company as a public benefit corporation. It's not a non-profit," unquote. So PBCs are a relatively new concept in the mainstream. There's no single binding definition for what they are, but generally a PBC has a baked-in legal responsibility to do something that's considered to be for the public good, rather than a sole responsibility to return value to shareholders, as you would usually see in just a basic, widely held public, for-profit corporation. Dave.
This is, just to clarify, this is a United States entity, isn't it? This has to be
yes, it seems like from all the context that we were getting, and there's more to come, it does seem like we're talking about a U.S. entity that he is creating, has created to acquire these assets from Commodore Corporation, and the public benefit corporation concept is what we're talking about here in the U.S. Like I said, there's not a single definition. There are like trade bodies like B Corp that give you a template if you want to follow their template for being a public benefit corporation. Use their B Corp mark, but it's not a strictly legally defined concept. But it does mean that you're building something into effectively your charter that says we're going to do something for the public good, whatever that's defined as being by the officers of that company. So since the part 1 video dropped, we here at This Week in Retro have been discussing when and how to cover this story. And from that moment, I've repeatedly asked one question. Where is the prospectus? That is, where is the formal public document that explains to potential investors what it is you'd be investing in, how capital is being allocated, all that good stuff. And I can tell you that as of our recording time, there is still no public prospectus. What there is a link provided in the video which resolves to a Google form, and that form is entitled the Let's Buy Commodore Outreach Form. Atop that Google form, again at the moment of recording, certainly subject to change, is the following disclaimer, which I'm quoting. This is for informational purposes only and is not an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any securities. Any securities offering referenced is being made pursuant to Rule 506C of Regulation D under the Securities Act of 1933 and is available only to verified accredited investors. Investing in private securities involves substantial risk, including the risk of loss of your entire investment. The securities offered have not been registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, or any state securities authority. And then below that on the form, there's a drop-down that asks you why you're visiting the form. One of the options is to say, quote, I am an angel investor. Now then, there are two terms we'd like to stop and discuss and define. One is that angel investor bit, and the other is accredited investor. Angel investor is not a term with a formal definition under U.S. laws and regulations, but if you ask an institution such as the Silicon Valley Bank about it, you will find this, which is found in their article on, quote, learn how to find and work with angel investors. And they say in this article, quote, what is an angel investor? An angel investor is an individual who provides early stage funding to startups, often in exchange for convertible debt or ownership equity. These investors are typically well-connected and have a vested interest in supporting innovative business ideas. End of the quote from that article. There's also a line that I found intriguing, which reads, typically, angel investors aim for a 10% to 30% equity stake in a company. Now then, the term accredited investor does have a formal definition. The SEC, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, defines it. And it turns out that lots and lots of different entities can be considered accredited investors. A bank, for example, is an accredited investor. Individuals must have a net worth of at least $1 million US, not counting the value of their primary residence, or they must have personal income of at least $200,000 over the last 2 calendar years, or joint income with a spouse of at least $300,000 in the past 2 calendar years. Those are the rules in the U.S. Other nations have similar concepts. Sometimes they have a slightly different name, but the basic premise is that securities regulators in various countries want to make sure that this type of restricted security is sold only to people who have or are likely to have some investment experience already. They don't want this to be a starter investment for anybody. It is my strong understanding, based on my research for this story, that an offering that's made under SEC Rule 506C is open to U.S. investors only. I would say that is the vibe I pick up from the video content. I can't swear to that. That's not a personal area of expertise, but I believe that's the thread that we're on right now. In any case, I do know from my research that if you're invoking SEC Rule 506C, the SEC points out that means you are selling restricted securities, which have a definition, and they define it as restricted securities are previously issued securities held by security holders that are not freely tradable. I want to emphasize that point, not freely tradable, as in illiquid. So one making an investment in restricted securities neither has a guarantee of any return of capital or dividend, nor do they have a guarantee of a market for their holdings should they wish to sell. In conclusion, for what I've done for the background research here, this part 2 video points 1 to a Google form. One of the options on that form asks you to raise your hand if you consider yourself an angel investor who would also meet the threshold of being a formally defined accredited investor. I do not know what happens from there because I do not wish to field an inquiry from Mr. Simpson asking me to verify my accredited investor status, which anybody who's soliciting investments via Rule 506C is required to do. If you, however, are a U.S. accredited investor and you are wondering how much he's asking for, if you just read the transcript of that video, you wouldn't exactly know, and as I mentioned, there is no public prospectus at this time. However, there's an on-screen graphic, and at one point it says the words, angel investor, $25K plus question mark. I think a reasonable person could interpret that as a request for at least 25,000 American dollars to invest in this public benefit corporation being set up as the holding company to buy the assets that Commodore Corporation holds. But as I say, I am not a practicing investment advisor.
So thank you for that. Christian did make it clear in both parts of the video that he had wanted to allow everybody to invest in this, but he couldn't find a way to do it, which basically says that he couldn't find a way around the rules that protect people from these types of risky investments. Although I don't think people would be approaching it with the idea that they're guaranteed a return or it is an investment that are going to make lots of money on. I think most people would approach it as, I want this to happen and I accept that my money may not come back to me. So I don't think that was a terrible thing for him to do. He's given a figure that he says they are willing to sell to him for, and he says it's low seven figures. So that would be anywhere, I guess, up from 1 million upwards. And he said he wants people to pay him 6.4% to use the Commodore branding on things. And that's where I think I have my first problem with this. I actually can't think of many customers for it. I know that Jens from Individual Computers, that's iComp, did indeed license the Commodore branding from these people to do the reproduction Commodore 64 cases. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Dave, I just want to clarify, when you say that Individual Computers licensed from these people, we're talking about Commodore Corporation as it exists today, not not
the one that Christian Simpson is proposing to do from the current owners that he's proposing to buy from. So it's a perfectly reasonable thing for him to do, because if you want to buy a reproduction case, you want it to look like the right things. You want the Commodore branding on it, so he's paid for that. But who else would be a customer? Well, Perry talks about the Mega 65 and the C64 Mini and the Maxi. He shows he's regretful that they aren't officially Commodore licensed. He talks about the Commander X16, and he feels they should have a Commodore badge on it. But he does, at least in part two, he does reflect on that and say, well, it's a bit much to ask for those to change now, because the Commander X16 is already in production. The Mega 65 is already in production. And I felt that unless you needed to buy the IP, you wouldn't buy the IP. And in fact, just before we're recording this, on Retro Group Limited's Facebook page, so these are the guys that made the C64 Mini and the C64 Maxi, the A500 Mini, and are currently trying to make the A1200 Maxi. They say, just to avoid people getting confused, and with people already commenting on posts, the recent news ref, the Commodore brand has no real relevance to us, nor the pending VA1200, nor in fact any of our products in general. We will be making announcements on our revised release timeline soon, but to be very clear, once again, the Commodore brand news is not relevant to our releases. But to also be very clear, all is well with our pending releases. Keep watching. Smiley face, thumbs up. Tom Andrews comes in and says, that's good, but I think we all want to know is, could the A1200 be called the Commodore A1200 now? And Retro Games Limited replied with remarkable clarity, we pay game owners royalties, other IP owners, and with rising global manufacturing and transport costs rising, we have no desire to have to charge you guys even more by adding further license fees. So what they're saying is that they don't want to pay any more to this, so they won't be approaching the new Commodore to pay them this 6.4% tariff, tax, whatever you want to call it, fee. Christian lambasts other projects in the past that have had the Commodore badge slapped on them. Now, there have been robot hoovers, there's been speakers, laptops, and all sorts. And I think the reason why they've had the badge slapped on them is because they have nothing to do with Commodore at all, but someone feels it adds value to it to say, buy the Commodore robot hoover. Put a smile on your face when your robot hoover goes past with the chicken lips on it, for example. And I get that would put a smile on people's face. In the past, hardware expansions, peripherals did not need and did not seek Commodore branding. You do not need it, and you never have needed it to make a fast loader cart or a joystick or a disk drive. You didn't need to pay a license fee then, and you won't need to now. But from his video, particularly in part one, he seems to indicate that he wants that to happen. And he's chosen this fee tariff, whatever you want to call it, to be 64 turned into a percentage, 6.4%. But I don't understand who he thinks is going to be coming to him to pay that, other than people making reproduction cases or devices that are not Commodore that want to present themselves as Commodore. If it is the 64 Mini, for example, you don't need to tell people it's a Commodore, already looks at one. The other big problem I see is with legal battles. And there have been legal battles since 1994. They've never really let up. They have done this trick, though, of making you think, well, that's it. That's all the Commodore battles settled. We can go on with things now. No. They all come back. And as I mentioned, there are no less than 4 pretenders to the Commodore crown. Perifractic is looking at buying one of them, although it is the one that generally most people feel is the right one. And at present, he's not trying to buy the Amiga or the Commodore ROMs or any of the other Amiga or Commodore various things that you can buy. There's already been Facebook comments from one of the other Commodores, a guy called Massimo Canigiani, a guy who's been trying to make the new Commodore, he calls the Commodore GK64. Now, Massimo collects supercars, and I've seen photos of his garage with Ferraris, etc., so perhaps he's got the money to fight it in court. I don't know. Does Perifractic have big pockets for the inevitable legal battles? I did read some comments on his video that gave me a bit of concern. A guy asked, how do you plan to defend the brand from IP misuse once, and he puts in quotes, pirates find out the extent of the financial backing? And Retro Recipes, which is Perifractic, his YouTube channel, replies, I don't understand the question, sorry. Defending the brand from IP use would happen the same way any brand defends from IP misuse. I don't get the bit about pirates and financial backing extent. And the original commenter replies, hi, yeah, I mean, if you don't have sufficiently strong resources to defend the brand in court, someone could just use the brand as they wish. And Perifractic's reply is, oh, well, filing a bad faith trademark takedown would cost about $4K dollars max. There are many options for lawsuits beyond that, from using capital to pro bono lawyers to community lawyers, etc. So that doesn't fill me with confidence that he understands that there have always been IP problems with Commodore and Amiga and all the rest of it, and that he's possibly setting himself up for that. On the other hand, though, there's good things to say about this project. He has assembled quite a team of people for this. Lots of Commodore luminaries, and even a celebrity endorsement too from Thomas Middleditch. He played Richard in the sitcom Silicon Valley. Also, Michael Tomchek, David Pleasance, Hans Olsen, Tim Morgan, Marvin Drugsma, Bill Hurd, even Jerry Ellsworth has outed herself as an investor in it. She's in the first video endorsing it. However, I'm not sure they're singing from the same hymn sheet. I'm not sure exactly if they know what they're doing, because David Pleasance has been on his own Facebook stating that this is to buy the whole of Commodore, which is not. The proposal on the table, according to Perifractic in his 2 videos, is to buy Commodore BV and not the whole of Commodore. There are lots of parts of Commodore that there's no proposal to buy, although he has indicated an aspiration that hopefully, maybe eventually he could do that. So either Perifractic has already done that in the background and that's happening, that's coming along and he can't comment on it, or Mr. Pleasance is doing a bit of creative marketing. But in part 2, I did see what I thought was better thinking from him. So this isn't just simply charging 6.4% tax on everybody who has anything to do with Commodore. With his team of people, he wants to make new products that are aligned with what he feels is the Commodore ethos and values. And he says there's more details coming in part 3. So at least he's not thinking that all he needs to do is complete this transaction and then charge everybody 6.4%, and that's going to put him in charge of Commodore and everything to do with it from then on. So I don't think he's quite as naive as that. Jason, you have been a Commodore fan forever. I greatly appreciate the research you put into your earlier part, which was free of your own opinions. Now, Commodore is how you got into your career. You have lived and breathed Commodore for decades. You have buttoned your mouth up till now on your opinions. What are they?
So I guess the lead opinion is I cannot believe that 30 years later I'm still engaging with the question, who is going to buy Commodore? There's young Jason in May 1995 said, I'm just glad this is all over. We'll hopefully be able to include the scan of my dog-eared quote in the Wall Street Journal on that. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Who among us hasn't wandered into the juice bar after a really good 90-minute yoga session and said, who should fix Commodore? This guy. This guy should fix Commodore. And I'm fundamentally pro-capitalism. I think that any capitalist who wishes to solicit investment regarding Commodore, which I'm going to do some more direct quoting from part 2 here, quote, blipped into a parallel universe, unquote. And, to quote again, quote, pull back that long-lost friend from another cosmic level, unquote. Pursuant to applicable securities regulations, I think that capitalist should be allowed to pursue his dreams. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the like that retro game thing, but Chris has been sitting patiently for a long time too. I want to make sure that we hear from him. And he's in a nice new room. I mean, you've got to have new opinions in a nice new room.
It's an old room, actually. I won't go bore you with the details of that. It's temporary. Let's put it that way. But I don't know, this whole thing, you guys clearly have got a lot more expertise in the sort of makeup of this. And I've watched part 2 specifically at least twice now, and I get more and more confused as to exactly what is on offer on the table each time. But what I will say is this, I think this is a fair comment. I part of me wishes it wasn't a YouTuber doing this, right? And I'll explain why. And that it wasn't done in this kind of a public way. It just remained a faceless entity. And the reason why is because it's a YouTuber, people are going to weigh in one side or the other because they like the person, or they like that person's content, or they don't like the person, or they don't like that person's content. And that's going to sway their thinking on this. And you've got to separate yourself from who it is that's doing this, and whether or not you like the content or the style of their channel, because all these nasty comments come to the fore, and just look at this project for what it is. But on the same token, I can see why Christian wants to share this experience with the community, because it's a big thing. A lot of us follow Commodore. You look at the hit numbers on these videos, and they've gone ballistic. And that shows you how many people are emotionally invested in this. So, yeah, I can see why he's done this, but I almost wish he hadn't done it this way.
I actually want to add something that I didn't really think of until you just said that, is more often than not in the who's buying Commodore, who ends up with Commodore, it's not the people that you're hearing from the most. That was true in 1995. That was true in 1997. Pretty sure in some of the later waves, it's not the people that are talking the most about that. Now, past is not necessarily a predictor of the future, but more often than not, it's not the people that are making the public campaign that end up with it. And to that sort of roster of luminaries, that roster of luminaries in different configurations has been associated with a lot of different projects, Lancia Industries. So just, in a way, you'd almost, or at least I would almost be more, give something higher odds if it were people that I'd never heard of, because those are usually the ones that take it. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, that's right. In terms of what's been done with the brand in the past, I actually missed out on when Commodore was used to just slap the badge on things like cheap phones and laptops and stuff. When I came back into the hobby, I realized that had been done, that had been a thing. And I was actually quite sad, right, that I hadn't been able to pick up these, which were apparently, pieces of tat, just, a generic Android phone and, an overpriced Windows laptop, overpriced because it had the Commodore brand on. And I do see value in that. I would love it. I mean, I've now finally got my MacBook Air. I would love it if instead I was actually running. I would have gone to Windows 11 if it was a Commodore laptop, right? I'd have made that leap. That would have been fun, especially if maybe it came packaged with emulation already pre-built in. That would be good fun. But I don't think, from what I pick up from the video, this is not what Christian's planning on doing. He wants to sort of give the brand more kudos again than just, Dave's going,
I can't see him having the might to take on Apple and Microsoft. Of course, he's not going to come out as the third player in that. I don't think he's going to bake his own alternative to Linux. What I think we'll see is what we have seen before with Amiga, is an operating system based on Linux or Unix, where it has Amiga emulation baked in, and you use the Amiga side of it as much as you can but where it needs to, it breaks out to Linux to do other things that the Amiga can't do. Yeah. And he could theoretically produce some kind of mini PC, because mini PCs, unless you're doing video editing or high-end gaming, a mini PC is plenty powerful. So he could produce a mini PC with that baked in, and you could have a quite reasonable desktop experience with an Amiga flavor to it, a Commodore flavor to it. So we could look at doing that. However, he won't be the first to do it, nor do you need to buy any IP to do it.
Well, and that's all speculation. We don't know what he's going to do. He's going to announce a product. We don't know what that is. So that is speculation. Yeah. But what I'm saying is it doesn't appear to be his plan to just slap Commodore stickers on cheap phones. That's what I'm saying.
But if you go back to one of the previous incarnations of Commodore, one of the American ones where they were making Commodore laptops, do you think they went into it thinking, we're going to get the cheapest laptops we can, slap a Commodore logo on it, and Marx will buy it? I'm sure they had loftier ambitions than that, at least at the start.
Yeah. Anyway, but it doesn't seem to be wanting to go that same track anyway.
No.
Will this work? Will this work well? And I don't know. It's. I think where I'm coming from is let's give the guy a break and see where it goes, right? And at the end of the day, surely the branding being in the hands of a true enthusiast is better than it sitting dormant with some faceless investors and not doing anything with it.
He's made that assertion that he's a true Commodore fan, as if the other ones aren't. Everyone involved in this is a Commodore fan. You haven't bought this unless you're a Commodore fan. So the people that own it already are Commodore fans. Anyway,
but didn't they front up and say, well, it sounds like you know better what to do with the brand than we do, which is why they went into negotiation?
They said that. I don't know if they said that.
Yeah, he said, they said.
There's a fake voicemail clip that he's made. I say fake. He hasn't made it sound. He's not proposing this is real. He's a dramatized voice clip he's put in. So yeah. Fundamentally, I don't think the Commodore can be saved because it went bust in 1994, and it was split into lots of pieces. There were points at 1995, and then maybe 1997 was maybe, in my opinion, the last possibility to stop it shattering and being decades before it came back. So even if he manages to unite all the pieces, which he's not proposing to do, then even if he does reunite all the pieces, I don't think it's saving Commodore. I think it's too late. Nor do I think that would come in at 7 figures. I think he's looking at well into 8 figures to buy all the parts. And even if he does, that's not saving them. But as it stands, it appears that only accredited investors can get involved in this. He hopes in a few years' time to be able to sell shares to normal people. So I'm not worried about accredited investors. If an accredited investor invests in this, well, they know what they're doing. They will invest in lots of things and they will lose money on most of them. But the times when they make money will more than make up for it, you would hope. So good luck to them there. Jason.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I wanted to go back to the Retro Games Limited comment that you spotted, which is a really clear example of at least, stating in public, we're not interested in this. We're not interested in it at any price. Just like Christian's 6.4%, people can negotiate in public. Like, that's fine. He can say 6.4%. They can say not interested in any price. Maybe they meet in the middle at 3.2 or somewhere else. Like, that could happen. But I do think it's interesting to see one of those chief potential customers making the clear statement, no, not for us. Thank you. So my point in saying that is it's important to remember that because something, I don't mean this in a critical way, but because something is said now as this is what our business plans are, or this is what our cost structure will support, that doesn't mean that these positions can't move. But it is interesting to see the back and forth already of, does this have value? And, a chief potential customer saying, no, thank you, it doesn't.
I actually just want to stick my neck out and say, good on you, Perifractic. I wish you well. And partially because I'm sort of saying this tongue in cheek, but a lot of people behind the scenes are moaning about this project. Would they have any clue as to how to do it better? I don't know. At least he's giving it a try. So good on you.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants this to fail. I hope that he makes a success of it. And as I said, only accredited investors can get involved, so I'm not worried about them. So if he gets anything out of this, then it'll be good. But my suspicion is that it'll just end up being with a change of the ownership of the IP, the previous owners getting out, cashing out while they can, and nothing really changing in the world. But I'd love to be wrong about that. We are sponsored this week by PCBWay.com. Jason.
Yes, PCBWay.com has shared projects that are always a fun read. Looks like it's the 11th anniversary of the Snake Game Console Max. It's a fun 64 by 32 LED matrix panel that you can play all sorts of Tetris-y and breakout-y Pong type games on.
Snake.
Yeah. Yep.
It's also the 11th anniversary of PCBWay.com, and they have discounts and various different things going on to celebrate that.
Another cool project on here from Gavin Knight in the UK. Looks like it's the CYD Galagino handheld. Nice little landscape format handheld device with your standard D-pad and 2 buttons there. He's got a Pac-Man running on it, and an old school 7-segment 4-digit LED display smart clock. It looks like a standard 1980 issue bedroom alarm clock, but it's Wi-Fi enabled. It's got an ESP32 module in it, doing all sorts of clever stuff. So just for the shared projects alone, PCBWay.com, worth a visit.
Yeah, and I noticed, I was watching YouTube videos yesterday, and someone was repairing an IBM PS2. They needed drive rails, plastic drive rails, went straight on to PCBWay, found the project, ordered them to 3D printed, and got them delivered. A lot less hassle than owning a 3D printer, which I was quite surprised about. So thank you, PCBWay.com, for sponsoring us.
Alan P. Thorpe on our subreddit brings us the news that another paper, staples, and glue pillar has fallen in the sad and long decline of the mainstream computing periodical as Linux Format has shipped its final issue. Now, this also, I believe, means the end of the line, at least for the time being, of Future Publishing's Computer Format magazine series, which began in the late 1980s with that multi-platform ST Amiga format magazine that later split up and specialized in its component parts. This shutdown is a little different than those of us who have retro enthusiasm have experienced in the past. Many of our computing magazines closed down because their formats, if you'll excuse the use of the word in lowercase generic, no longer have an enthusiastic installed base that's spending enough money to justify keeping them up.
2025 is the year of the Linux desktop, I believe.
Interesting. Well, they didn't get the memo over there at Future. But that does actually tie into the fact that, Linux Format would not seem to be suffering from a lack of an installed base of Linux users, which, according to published research, has been holding at a pretty steady 4 to 5% share of desktop and laptop computing for a good while now, which is not enormous, but, consistent and growing as computing grows worldwide. So that part of it doesn't seem to be the issue. According to the reporting in the article that we were linked to from OMG Ubuntu, provided by Alan, you like that?
Oh my God, it's Ubuntu!
Neither the final issue of Linux Format nor any statement from Future pointed to a cause for that shutdown. And, let's just be out with it. Linux culture is overall associated with getting your software for free, but I would suspect that overall the median Linux user in 2025 is more willing to spend money than the median Linux user of the year 2000 when that magazine launched. Now, I have a pretty decent guess going in about the magazines that my co-hosts were looking at in the 80s and 90s, but did you
How dare you? How dare you?
I didn't mean it like that. But did you carry through to any of the mainstream print magazines in computing in the 2000s when Linux Format was spinning up, but at that same time when digital distribution of news, features, reviews, analysis was starting to hit its stride? And by mainstream, I'm talking about publications that have retail distribution at newsagents, bookstores, those types of places, as well as a subscription model. In the UK and US, at least, that means you're looking at printed circulation tens of thousands minimum.
Over here, when I first built my first PC over here, there was a great magazine called Atomic Magazine. So I don't know if anybody in Australia remembers that. It was just a good, fun computing magazine. So that was definitely early 2000s, went on for a good few years. And then I just stopped buying it, and I didn't realise it had dropped off the radar, but it had come to an end.
What was the vibe? What's an analog for those of us who know the UK and US scene? Like Maximum PC?
Sorry, say that again?
Was it like Maximum PC? Was it kind of a...
Yeah, it was just sort of,
enthusiast PC Mag?
it sort of leaned more towards the sort of modding your PC and sort of making it your own and that kind of stuff. And they had this wonderful, I think they called it Case of the Month or something. I can't remember, but it was, a reader would send in a photo and a short write-up. And so different PC cases, completely modded. And some of the best ones that I saw one was literally a working gaming PC, but it was basically not in a case. It was hung on a toolboard in the shed, right? So it was just out to the elements, but it was a fully working PC. Another one was in an attaché briefcase. So it was a briefcase, and then you flick the things, open it up, and inside was a working PC. So that's the kind of sort of stuff they encouraged. It was a really different vibe to everything else that I'd read before. So that's what I was reading into the 2000s. That and car magazines, still print, but just not computers.
I think I dropped magazines in the 90s. I've been trying to think of why I dropped them. I think it's down to three reasons. Moving on to PC and gaming on that being more mainstream, meaning there was more information generally available. I didn't need to buy a sort of a niche magazine to get information on it. Secondly, the internet. I think that was the biggest reason. That did mostly replace it. You could find the same information in the magazines on the internet. And I think thirdly, the culture in magazines was a bit too much lads. Certainly in the UK, it was a bit too much lads, and that put me off. And I didn't start going back to magazines until I started buying Fusion Retro and then Retro Gamer and now Pixel Addict. And in retrospect, I regret dropping magazines. Although the information is out there, magazines are great. Having it there and not having someone tell you, I know you're looking at this now, but we want you to stop and do something else. Adverts appearing, all the rest of it. Having someone saying, this is all I'm going to be able to say to you, so I'm going to put it into one article and that's it, and that's the full stop. There's something about that kind of format that's better, that isn't the same as what you can get online, unless, of course, you have things like disc mags and so on, which are the attempt to replicate it, which you know all about, Jason, having run one. But yeah, I do regret that I didn't keep up with magazines. And I think that the modern attention-hungry way we do things is less pleasant than magazines.
Yeah, and as we tipped into the year 2000 and beyond, traditional media like newsstand magazines just got obliterated by digital media. In so many ways, it'd be painful for me to recount them. And yeah, as you said, Dave, I was at the vanguard of this. When I'll say it again, when I first had to spend time thinking about who was going to buy Commodore, because back in the mid-90s, I could aggregate things that, I thought they were news, into the hypertext format and push it out every week or even as a special issue when the occasion demanded it. And so, people took a lot of interest in my work on Amiga Report for that reason. Print Amiga magazines were at best a month behind on what passed for developments and what was happening with Commodore's bankruptcy, and usually more than that. And it's more than that because, writing, copy editing, layout, printing, binding, labeling, mailing, that all takes a lot of time and effort. But the decline of the mainstream computing magazine isn't simply the story of changing landscape and faster, more efficient ways of disseminating information. Those things are true, but it's ultimately about shifting preferences by advertisers in the ad media that they buy. Because an important thing that you need to remember about a mainstream magazine is that its primary business purpose is to sell advertising pages. Subscriptions and retail sales are not typically the key revenue source for a mainstream magazine. It's those ad pages. It's advertising, not the ability to source, report, and print news and analysis. It's advertising that determines when a magazine spins up, how its page count fluctuates, and ultimately when it is shut down. So, I had the tremendous good fortune to make my foray into the mainstream world of magazine publishing in 1998. That happened to be the year that I graduated from university, and it happened to be the year that CU Amiga shut down. So kind of my main, professional outlet was going away. There was a public web at the time, but, magazine content was spotty at best on news sites. Almost nothing was being shipped in an easily piratable PDF format. And frankly, people who wanted to scan and distribute pirated magazines, it happened, but it was a complicated proposition at best. It was going to be time consuming on what passed for broadband at the time. The print tech computing magazine was still king. And up until the first .com bubble burst, some magazines were expanding so quickly they had a hard time keeping up with enough content to fit the ads. Adjusted for inflation, the most money I have ever earned on a single article as a writer was for an issue of a publication which had a sudden influx of advertising in 1999. Yeah.
99,
Yep, 99.
Then the bubble,
Yeah, it was still going, because at least in the U.S., and I suspect this is true in other developed markets at the time, magazines are given ultra favorable postal rates for mailing, and it's in the U.S. it's called second class mail being sent to subscribers. The catch is that in order to earn that second-class mailing rate, a certain percentage of that magazine must be, what the Postal Service will consider editorial content, that is, not advertising. So this particular magazine that I wrote for had a problem. They definitely wanted to accept this expanded ad revenue that was coming in that month, but they needed to pad out the magazine with more content pages in order to keep the second-class mailing rate. So I had something like 72 hours to write this 14-page story, and I still cherish the memory and the paycheck.
Was the story any good?
I thought it was all right. It was mapping software, and for the time I had and what was available at the time, I think I did all right.
Well done.
I'll stand by it. So the other thing is that digital advertising media provides up-to-the-minute feedback to advertisers. Everything from impressions delivered to click-throughs, even conversions to sales. If you do the data integration or you just sell on the same platform that's delivering the ads, that's become pretty common. Advertising in print gives you none of that. You have to believe the publishers, and publishers do get audited, but it's only occasionally. You have to believe them about how many issues they're printing and shipping, how many subscribers receive them, how many copies are really being sold at retail versus what they call stripped, which means they're, covers torn off and they're either thrown in the trash or given away. And in print, you don't have an automatic way to detect if your advertising is working. There are long-running tricks in what they call direct response advertising. There are those reader service card numbers, circle the numbers on this card and mail it in, and you get information from the company. That way they know their ads are working. You can give out a department code that's going to be specific to a magazine or a publisher, an issue. You can do special dedicated phone lines or extensions, or you can even set slightly different prices in each publication and wait for the customer to tell you something like, for example, well, I want to buy Beachhead Trilogy that I see advertised here for $19. And then the mail order company knows, aha, well, $19 was the price we put in this magazine. So that's where, we know where they must have seen it. And those methods were great in the 1980s and 90s when there was no digital advertising worth mentioning. It was actually a fairly good and, industry-leading way to get that kind of feedback. But it's a tough sell to ask advertisers to invest significant sums in print now. In digital, you even get a pretty good idea of the demographics of each individual that's seeing and responding to your ad. Print only affords broad guesses at that level of detail. And without print ad support, you don't get mainstream magazines, period. There are still mainstream computing publications out there. I noted that Wired still somewhat hilariously pledges to ship at least 4 print issues per year. And there are still specialist magazines available in major stores. I got a valuable correction from Chris before we went to air this morning. But the trend, alas, is inexorable. Blake Patterson on his Byteseller blog called the end of an era for American computer magazines when Maximum PC and MacLife were shut down at the end of 2023. And I find that hard to argue. And the end of Future's format magazines sure feels like a similar milestone for what was once a very, very vibrant UK market where I first was making real money as a part-time professional. So, guys, of those old magazines that were out there, which would you like to have seen kind of carry on and evolve into the present day if there was a magical fountain of ad money that could have kept them afloat?
I didn't buy any interactive fiction magazines ever, but there were always interactive fiction sections in the magazines I did buy. I'd like to see a dedicated interactive fiction magazine come out, put through my door, printed, to hold in my hand, because I think interactive fiction is one of the nicest ways to zone out from the real world and exist in your own head and in the game and escape from everything else. So a physical magazine to hold in your hand would enable that to happen. So I don't have a particular preference for which interactive fiction magazine it was. I would just like to be able to subscribe to one. I would, of course, love to see Amstrad Action and ST format, the 2 magazines that I bought the most, for my Amstrad CPC and my Atari ST. It's nice, though, to have Pixel Addict and Fusion magazines, though. but there just isn't enough ST and Amstrad content out there. The one magazine, though, I think I liked the most out of everything is a weird one for me to say because I've never touched one in person. I've only read them within the past 10 years, and it is Byte. And Byte was a hugely important American magazine. It had this really optimistic outlook, as if the future is going to be better. That doesn't even need to be thought about. The future is going to be better. And I just love reading the old Byte magazines because it was always so future and positive looking. Whereas today, everything, it feels as if it's looking backwards, and we're almost trying to insulate us from the bad news happening in the real world, which just didn't. The optimism was there in the 80s and 90s that this doesn't exist now. So that's why I went back.
Atomic Magazine, which I mentioned before, I don't understand why that stopped at all, because, I mean, that's a fairly late one, but because it was about modding computers, that's still massive, right? And there's more and more stuff you could do. One of my friends just rigged up a PC. It's got screens on the heatsink, right? On the cooler and on the RAM and on the fans and everything. Got that. Has it really? God,
yeah,
my Mac doesn't have that. Why
it came with a motherboard. But the games still happen, though. PC gaming still happens bigger than ever, and there's the magazines are dying off for that as well. It's just it's the format that's going. It's not the hobby.
I don't get it. Well, and that's an interesting thing in itself, because, I mean, we could segue into things like car magazines, train magazines, all that. All these still exist. The print format is surviving in other hobby areas. So I don't understand. Oh, yeah, it's dipping down, but it's still there. Anyway. So ones I would like to bring back: Atomic Magazine, Amiga format, of course, that goes without saying. I'm happy with Amiga Addict filling that gap. Don't get me wrong. That's fantastic, but it would be great to see Amiga format, that title again. And the other one I'm going to throw in is PC Zone, which does exist online under a new ownership. But to see a magazine for PC Zone, and this is where I'm probably going to disagree with you slightly, Dave. PC Zone was very laddie. It was a blokes magazine. It was rude. It was crude. It was. But I loved it. That's what I loved about it. It was half the time reading it, I'm like, should I even be reading this? This is a bit naughty. And I liked that. That's my humor. So, yeah.
The good news for Dave is that even though they haven't promised a regular return, there is a pretty new issue of the Classic Adventurer out, which is downloadable or print on demand. So one can get a little bit of an interactive fiction magazine fix. But yeah, in one form or another, yes, magazines will never truly vanish. And I think in a lot of those industries that you were talking about, Chris, you'll get kind of that one survivor magazine, which in the Amiga market in the UK was Format. Format was able to kind of go along for a little while because they were the last one standing. And when you're the last one, then the advertisers in that market have a choice. Do we want to do print or not? And something, just enough. So yeah, a lot of those industries will have that one that's still hanging in there. And knowing that you were seeing Addict on the shelves even in Perth, that was impressive for me. And Retro Gamer is still making it work at retail in the UK and the US. And there are lots of subscription only and print and then digital only publications out there. That's a different business model altogether. Just now, while preparing the story, I glanced at our This Week in Retro Twitter feed, where a recent guest, What Ho Snorkers, was amplifying the launch of a digital magazine called Breakspace, which purports to be, quote, the world's cheapest ZX Spectrum magazine. It's a
And ZX Spectrum owners are renowned for their eye for a bargain, we'll call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a lighthearted 56-page full-color PDF. Full spectrum color palette, yeah. But print magazines, it's a tough business, and it's not bound to get any easier anytime soon. So hold those publications close if you value them, and by all means, fill out and send in those reader service cards.
I wonder if there is a market for people who will buy magazines at any cost, because in the older days, it used to be the cost of the magazine was brought down to what would now be relatively low amounts. I wonder if people are, and they must be, because that's what Pixel Addict magazine is by no means cheap because it's such a small thing. I wonder if there's more of a willingness to say, I accept this as niche and I will pay more for it because I really do value the mental health that magazines provide to me by being able to sit down with something that isn't bapping for my attention all the time like a Jack Russell Terrier.
Yeah. And the answer is absolutely yes. Like at any time in researching the story, when I was looking at, kind of doing quick searches on Reddit and elsewhere, like, is XYZ magazine still available on newsstands? And like over and over, I kept running into like, yeah, I found it at Barnes and Noble. Man, it's expensive. Like it always ends up with, oh, I'm glad I found it. I couldn't believe how expensive it was when I did. So yes, especially as you get down to that, right? It's the surviving customers in the market. It's the one surviving magazine that really caters to that. So I say tough model, not getting any easier, but fingers crossed for what ultimately has been my most rewarding format to write for.
Housekeeping time with Dave is here. Have no fear, he'll keep things clear. It's housekeeping time with Dave.
Short housekeeping and no news and briefs today because of the rest of the content in this show. 3 banging stories. I've got a new camera. I hope you find it's better. The old one died. This one died during the recording already. So that's fantastic. Chris has a new computer, a new bedroom.
Laptop. There you go.
And Jason isn't wearing the jacket. So that's housekeeping for this week. Part 1 of the Q&A, or part one of the Q&A, went out this week on Wednesday, or will have gone out on Wednesday, if I get my tenses correct, for patrons only. So don't miss that if you are an official twirler. There are at least 2 more parts to come, probably 3 more parts. Loads and loads of questions were asked. So thank you very much, twirlers, for asking your questions. We have a couple of new patrons to welcome on. So welcome, Brian. Thank you very much. And welcome again, the Retro Collective. Ended up cancelling his subscription last time, Neil did, because he was charged an Apple tax. But now he's back on properly. So thank you for becoming a twirler. And if you'd like to join them, if you'd like to see the Q&A, for example, as well, if you want to become an official twirler, where would you go, Jason?
I would go to patreon.com/thisweekinretro.
Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this. It's an Outrun story without being overshadowed by Neil's passion for Outrun, because yes, I also love the game. I've always loved the game just as much as he does. I just don't happen to have a cab I can practice on every single day. And you never want to rain on somebody else's parade, so I always let him get away with it when we would co-host, but it's my turn now. It's my time. And Outrun is just a fantastic game, and I'm not sure if it's my love of the Ferrari Testarossa that made me love the game, or if it was the other way around. It's honestly a blur. I've actually driven a Testarossa, by the way. Have I mentioned that before? I may well have done. Duncan, insert the overlay anyway. Thank you very much. Probably won't be the last time I use that flex. We've all driven what used to be Eric Clapton's Ferrari Testarossa at one point or another, I'm sure. So it's a boring story to tell. Anyway,
coming of age, all of us coming of age ritual. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But Outrun, it's just the ultimate road trip rather than a race, while still feeling heavily like you're involved in some kind of cannibal run, coast to coast, sea to shining sea. I love it so much. While still being terrible at it, if I'm honest, on the arcade version. Although I have beaten it on the Spectrum and on the terrible port on the Amiga and on the Mega Drive, and I can beat Outrun 2 coast to coast in the arcade because I find that identical to the PS3 version, which I've also beaten. But this story, shared with us by Dr. Local, isn't about Outrun or an update or a new port, or even about how the Amiga should have gotten a better port than it did.
It's not about Outrun.
No. It's not. Well, it kind of is. Not specifically about Outrun the game. It's a bit of an odd one, okay? Because let's face it, Outrun, while awesome, certainly isn't what you'd class a driving simulator, which is why I was very surprised to see a video about world-renowned racing driver Ben Collins having a stab at the Outrun world record. Now, Ben Collins, that may be a name you're not familiar with, but I'm sure The Stig is one you are, okay? So Ben Collins was The Stig.
Yeah, Stig is... Stig of the Dump was a children's book, and it ended up being The Stig was in a TV show called Outrun. No. The Grand Tour, no. Top Gear. Top Gear is a TV show, a British TV show that ended up going global. If you like cars, you've probably seen Top Gear. I'm sure everybody's heard of Top Gear, but what Top Gear was, they had this professional rally driver in or a racing driver of some kind. Various people have been the Stig over the years. They never officially announced who it was, and they always appeared in a proper helmet, so you couldn't tell who they were. They were just called The Stig, and Ben Collins is one of the Stigs.
That's correct. A fantastic driver. So this video is all about the Stig, and he was playing Outrun. And what's interesting is, the location that he's in, because it's a pokey little unassuming shed that hosts possibly the largest collection of Outrun racing games you may ever see in one shed. And that very same shed, in fact, owned by Mr. Outrun world unofficial record holder, Gary, that Neil also recently featured in one of his videos. It's the same shed. Gary's title is unofficial, as his run wasn't actually recorded, but he has a screenshot of his machine with a world record-breaking score of over 52 million points. The most bizarre thing about seeing the Stig playing Outrun in a shed, for me, is the fact that he's not the expert here. He's taking driving instructions and really taking it on board from a bloke called Gary in his shed. That made me chuckle. Gary basically gives the Stig driving lessons on how to get the best score in the game, which route to take, what line to take through certain corners and chicanes, and even where to lift off and even feather the throttle. And what's also really cool is that there's another, it's another great example of a celebrity with a gaming YouTube channel. The Stig is one of us, literally, because this isn't that some other lucky YouTuber has managed to get the Stig on. This is the Stig's gaming channel. This is at Ben Collins Gaming. This is his channel. The Stig has actually posted 2 Outrun videos. The one in question, where he seems to get a score of 20,598,730. And another video with a clearer view of the screen titled My Best Outrun Attempt. But oddly, in that one, he only scores 12 million odd. And that really confused me until I realised what he meant. He's a real racer, and score is meaningless. He was referring to his time, which came in at 5 minutes and 25.21 seconds from start to finish. So guys, do you think you could beat the Stig's score or time even on Outrun? Or, if not Outrun, what game do you think you could take a good crack at the record on?
Hello gang, it's me. I had the absolute pleasure of visiting Gary's Sega shed recently. You may have seen the video on my channel. And as an Outrun fan, to describe the feeling of stepping into that shed is it's just an astonishing place. Even back in the day, when I was looking for an Outrun cabinet in an arcade, it would always be the first one that I'd hear the attract sound to because my ear was just tuned into it, or I'd be looking for it to play it. I never saw, is it 6 that he had there all in a row? It was always just one. Maybe at best I would have seen 2 in an arcade. So I've never seen that many Outruns in one place. And then as you walk around, he had the turbo Outrun, the cockpit, which I never saw back in the day. That's a beautiful looking machine. And then the more modern Outrun 2 Coast to Coast, which is great fun to play, but I kind of relate that more to the Xbox. I think that's where I first played it rather than the arcade. And of course, they're big flat screens, which is they're fun games, but it's more of a new school arcade than the old school ones. And then of course he's got Hang On, a sit-on, Super Hang On, Power Drift, which is a game that I really love. Many people don't get on with that, but I really like it. And I think there was a Sega Rally in there as well. But of course, those 6 Outruns are the real standout. But then it goes beyond Gary's shed, because when you go into his house, he has the newest old stock Outrun you've ever seen in your life. It is pristine. And something I didn't show in the video was there's a little trick in Outrun where if you flick the gear stick in just the right way, you can go off-road without losing speed. And I did that, and as soon as I did that, he reached up and he took a sign off the top, and it just said "No Gear Gacha," which is the term used for doing that flicking. He had the sign ready to tell anyone off who did it on his pristine machine, and I got the telling off. Now, in terms of times, the Stig put in a good effort. I went and looked at the machine to look at my high score, and it had been erased. I think Holly gets in the habit of erasing them so that people that come to the arcade can enjoy being at the top of the scoreboard. So I couldn't find my old score on there, but I did find an old video of a run I did some time ago. So this is what I'm putting forward as my application to be the Stig. Can I outstig the Stig? Over to you, Chris.
I've seen that guy before. Do I know him from somewhere?
How did he manage to get back in on another Outrun story? Damn it. Anyway, is Neil faster than the Stig? Or did he score higher, or both? So Stig's best score was 20,598,730. Neil's best score that he can find a screenshot of was, I've got the screenshot here.
Drum
In
roll.
front of me, and it is 24,434,140. So he beat the Stig
Neil.
score-wise
Neil's better than a Stig.
by over 4 million, or by around 4 million. But, score's one thing. What about his time? So racing times, let's have a look. Stig's best time was 5 minutes and 25.21 seconds from start to finish. Now, Neil, he actually took the hardest route. So he went right at every junction, which isn't the best route to take. I think the best route is you go right, left, right, right. Neil can only do right-hand turns, apparently. But his time, regardless, was 5 minutes and 12.34 seconds. So he beats the Stig on both score and on time. Let's hear what Neil has to say about that.
What can I say? Ben Collins, I hereby revoke you of the name the Stig.
Thanks, Neil. Jason?
Guys, is it okay if I'm just not that into cool cars and TV shows about cool cars and games that are about cool cars? Can I please stay? Coming off of Neil dominating this, can I please stay?
As long as you promise that you love Ultima.
Can I move on, please? No, yeah, I'm not as deeply immersed in motorsport and racing games as you guys. But I will say that I kind of have, I was into the Amiga as a third place platform. I kind of like offbeat also rans. It's not necessarily on purpose. I like arena football, which is American football played in a hockey rink with 8 guys on each side. I like stuff like that. And I stumbled some years ago into Formula E, which is the all-electric open-wheel racing series some years ago. And I really like how goofy and impractical the whole thing is. So that's actually my motorsport of choice. I actually follow it fairly closely.
I love the fact that on Formula E, the whole response to the problem of battery charges, we'll just swap cars.
Yeah,
you go into the pits, you swap cars.
That was honestly one of the things that I'm like, this is nuts. You're racing this car for 20 minutes and you have to change to another. Now they've moved past that. They now can run them for a solid hour or so. But in that first generation, you would switch cars. It was nuts. But I'm like, this is so weird and impractical, and I love it. And by coincidence, I had a writing client for multiple years that was a Formula E sponsor, and my familiarity with the product actually did help. It is really cool seeing that these real world car skills translate to an old arcade game, though. And like you said, getting that sure, this is how the real vehicle would behave, but this is how you're going to need to feather an outrun throttle. That was pretty cool. I've never mastered a game to anything like speed run or world record dominance levels. If you put together a casual play Archon tournament, I can usually go pretty deep in that, but I'm sure there are worldwide players that know the same tendencies and tricks and would obliterate me. So
I am honored to know the world champion at Outrun, which is Neil, apparently. For me, it'd have to be Stunt Car Racer. If I was going to try and beat someone, Stunt Car Racer is amazing. I love that game, but I'd need to get the practice in because you really, really have to learn the tracks. And one of the beauties with Stunt Car Races is there's not just one way to learn the track. There's a safe way and there's a dangerous way to go much faster and take more damage, but get through the track a little bit faster. So I love that about the game. I wasn't that much into Outrun, really, not until I started in this show, and hearing Neil and Chris talking about it so much, with so much love, rubbed off on me. The two of you really, really love it, and it's hearing your warmth towards it that's made me open up a place in my cold and miserable heart for Outrun. I was actually watching, the other night I was watching Aaron from the Amigos. He does a disaster stream, he calls it a Friday night disaster stream on Twitch. And it's often too late for me to watch, but I happened to catch this one. And he was playing an old Amiga game that I'd forgotten about called Indie Heat, which is a topped-down Super Sprint style game, but it's a bit better than Super Sprint, but we're a bit more further along the line than Super Sprint. It's fantastic, and it got me thinking that that's my favourite type of racing game. So, Supercars 1, 2, the original Super Sprint, Ivan Ironman Stewart Super Off-Roads, Codemasters Grand Prix Simulator, which was absolutely not a simulator. Those kind of games are great fun. So it's the top-down ones that I like the best.
Some claims to fame I can now have, I think, include making Ricky Gervais use the laughing emoji in response to one of my comments on Facebook. Driving Eric Clapton's Ferrari Testarossa. I don't know if I've mentioned that before. Maybe I did. But now getting a reply to my YouTube comment from the Stig himself, which Duncan can overlay because that's a keeper. But I picked up on two major things in this video. One, how Ben's hands were glued to the 9 and 3 position on the steering wheel, not the 10 and 2 that we were all wrongly taught when we took our driving test.
I drive cool guy style with my hand coming up like that from below, one-handed.
One hand on
You
sit,
drive a
huh?
Jag, you can get away with it, yeah. Did you leave your wallet at home as well? That's a Top Gear reference, sorry. Jag. So none of the push-pull rubbish. He's just a instinctive racing driver through and through, even when he's playing Outrun. Jason?
Yeah, I wanted to know, Chris, can we tell people about the celebrity 2-player arcade racing challenge that I proposed that you seemed pretty into?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
We like to solicit celebrity involvement to play 2-player Atari fire truck as it is meant to be played. The crazy cabinet where you've got the stand-up wheel for the back half of the fire truck and the inside cabinet one. We are soliciting pitches now. Please submit your availability in Western Australia, your best time and score on fire truck. We want to make this happen for Chris.
That means we've got to find a fire truck, the fire truck game. Was that by Atari? That was Atari, wasn't it?
Chris has promised to pay for your flights.
Where am I going to find that? No, we'll do it in America. There's no. How many celebrities do we have over here? Not many. Maybe I'll have to go over east. That would be cool, though. That would be very cool. Other things I noticed during this video was, and this is the surprising part, it's not just him trying to take a slice of the retro gaming pie, because let's face it, it's not that big anyway, but it was Ben's clear and honest passion for the game and for other games he saw in Gary's magical collection. That really shone through. Ben promised that there's more 80s goodness to come on his channel, so I'd highly recommend you subscribe, and I suspect that this isn't the last time we'll see Gary's shed.
We are out of contest mode, so let's talk about the question of the week last week, which was, what's your most embarrassing game loss? And I'll go with I Am Amiga. I was busy playing Wolfenstein, The New Order 2016, and my 21-year-old eldest child came in to see me struggling with a mid-tier boss. She doesn't play intense action FPS games, preferring story-focused games like Resident Evil, Yakuza, and Final Fantasy. Well, she was making fun of me, and then I challenged her to take the boss on. My challenge backfired on me when she took care of the boss on the first attempt. I suspect I will never live this down.
Some people chose to overlook the fact that this was about ChatGPT being defeated by Atari Video Chess, and instead decided to talk about loss in a different way, like Prefim, who said, my most embarrassing game loss was a Star Trek Next Generation game I wrote in Amos back in the day. You did missions to transport people, rescue people off planets, fight enemy ships, etc. Quote, it was like you were in the show, unquote. It used digitized video and sound from the show. I was really pleased with it, as there were lots of minigames in it too. So much so, in my excitement to get it to Amiga format for review in their PD section, I posted off the only copy of the game, never to be seen again.
Oh,
Oofed.
no. Oh,
Oofed.
And Fiskit's taken a similar track. So Fiskit said, I lost a copy of Space Hulk to an X-copy accident. I'm not sure how that even happens. Actually, yes, I am. Yeah, if you've got the right protect off and you've chosen a wrong destination drive or something, or oh dear. A few about people actually losing the physical media rather than losing to a game or to an opponent, which is interesting.
Yeah, but Jacko6502 has that first Goomba in NES Super Mario Brothers. Even after all these years, that little mushroom fungi can still take me out from time to time on a badly timed jump.
I think it's because you load up Super Mario and you think, right, I'm going to really do it this time, really get into it, and you take that first one for granted, and before you know it, you've lost your life. You're bang, off the wall.
There is an Outrun answer.
What's the Outrun answer?
That's Pig Dog Bays, if you want to read that one out.
Oh, yeah, Pig Dog Bay. After my go at Outrun at Play Expo, a small crowd had gathered around the deluxe cab. A young lady gushed and said, "Oh, you're really good. Oh, you're really..." Did you like that voice? "Oh, you're really good." Hardly. I timed out on Gateway. I replied back to her, "My mate is much better than me. He can finish it." My mate climbed into the seat, picked his soundtrack and was off. 5 seconds later, he hit one of the bushes in the middle of the road. Dull, red-faced. He scarpered out of there. I still wind him up about it. I thought that story was going to go somewhere else. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
That was
the
the one.
End up beating the game and running off with the girl.
That was the one and only opportunity there's ever been to pull someone using Outrun, and it flopped.
Yes. Yes.
Loads more answers.
Who says that when a girl says, "You're really good at this"? You turn around, "My mate's much better." That's never going to go well for you.
On to this week's question of the week. And we might have asked questions about magazines, but we're going to ask another one. Which magazine would you bring back now? And why? And why would you think it's viable now? Or why do you think we're missing it now? So which magazine would you bring back now? Thank you very much for being with us in this probably longer episode. Not quite sure how long it is because my wonderful new camera crapping out has caused it to take 3 sessions. So not sure how long it is, probably over the hour. But anyway, join us next week, Twirlers. Thank you for being with us. Leave us a review if you haven't done. But thank you for being with us. See you next week. I'm waving at Dave and I'm waving at Chris on his MacBook. They're all waving. I'm waving too. We're waving. Hope you're waving too, Twirlers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.